Let's talk to Mayor Dee Margo. Hi, Mayor. How are you?
Fine, Buzz. How are you all?
Doing good. So big week for Texas this week, and we'll get into some of the stuff that's opening in the rest of Texas, but not in El Paso. I just wanted to bring up, it looks like we've seen some spikes, and I wonder if you could talk about that. It is almost 2 weeks since Mother's Day, and when we had John a couple of weeks ago, you were saying could result in a spike. Is that why we've seen some numbers up this week?
Buzz, as a matter of fact, when I had my daily call with Dr. Ocaranza yesterday, he said that he was certain that the spikes we're having in the hospitalizations are a direct result of Mother's Day.
Okay. So we've seen some numbers go up. We've had, tragically, some more deaths from COVID-19 in El Paso. We got another holiday coming up this weekend, Memorial Day. What are the concerns and the advice heading into Memorial Day specific to El Paso?
Well, the advice is repetitive and redundant. Wear face coverings when you can. But let me clarify, not in restaurants, not in bars when they open. When you're out walking with your family, you don't need to wear a face covering. If you're out exercising, you don't need to wear a face covering. Just maintain the social distancing. So all we know about this virus is that it's spread by contact. The real reason for the suppression and the lockdown that went across the United States was a concern over hospitalization capacity. And that was the reason that it was supposed to be a temporary lockdown so that we could manage the pandemic.
Flattening the curve.
Right, flattening the curve and avoid the hospitalizations going beyond capacity, which is frankly what occurred in New York and I think in New Orleans to a certain extent early on. But now we've done that. Your listeners need to understand we have plenty of hospital capacity. The governor has told us that if we had any spikes that we could not deal with from that standpoint, that he would provide support. He told me that he had over 6,000 ventilators already if we had any issues there. I think we're just to the point of figuring out how we're going to manage our lives given this pandemic and this virus until we have a vaccine.
There was one hospital, though, that said this week that they were running close to capacity, and it was a concern.
Yeah, it was UMC, and they're typically the first hospital that patients will go to. But the other hospitals, the Providence hospitals of Providence under Tenet and the Del Sol and Las Palmas under HCA, they still have capacity. They still have plenty of rooms, both in the ICU and in regular hospital rooms. Those numbers, for your listeners' sake, are reported every day to the states, mandated, so that the state of Texas sees where we are across the entire state on our health care capacity.
I was going to ask you, too, so we're seeing that some of the states are having discrepancies when it comes to the testing. We do see in all of the wonderful graphics that we're getting, they do have the list like this is how many tests we've done. Now, are those tests only the COVID test, or do those also include the antibody test as well?
I don't think we're listing the antibody test yet.
Okay.
But there have been several thousand antibody tests done. I think my last numbers were several days ago, and it was like 3,000 antibody tests. On the antibody testing, we're testing the medical care providers and our first responders.
Okay.
Let's get into a little bit. I just want to make sure, though, before we move on, it almost sounds like we're saying mission accomplished for the flattening the curve. Is that going a little too far, though?
Well, I'm listening in the way in to scientists are saying that we passed this point, that there was a group of 600 saying that the financial and the mental health issues of a lockdown we can't continue.
I have seen that, yeah.
And Buzz, I was at the food bank on Monday. The lines out there, they tell me we're feeding 140,000 El Pasoans at all our food banks. At the El Pasoans Fighting Hunger over in the Pan American Center, they told me Friday was the highest number they'd ever served in one day, and it was over 8,000 families. And I stood there and watched them do it. The National Guard is there. They need volunteers, and they need financial support. I want to put a plug in for that.
Okay.
We can't continue that way. The mental health issues are significant. I'm hearing stories right and left, and it's not just third-party anecdotal stories. It's real people having real problems. And frankly, if you've never been out of work or you've never been in a family that's out of work, you don't understand it. I remember my dad lost his job before my freshman year in college. And if I hadn't had a football scholarship, I don't know what would have happened. But I'm working in an iron foundry, and I remember every Friday walking in and handing my paycheck to my mother, not knowing what was going to happen next.
Especially if you're not making an income, and then you also find, well, it's difficult to get hired because you're not the only one who's out of a job. There's so many other people out of a job. It's just a bunch of compounding factors going on at the same time. All right, so for tomorrow, in most of Texas, El Paso's not included in much of this, bars are opening.
25%.
25%.
Right. So my question is, obviously this isn't happening in El Paso right now, but I did have a few questions. One, if our numbers continue to increase in the next week before the 29th, will that date get delayed out again?
I do not think so.
Okay.
I don't think we can stand it much longer, frankly. The judge and I felt like this 1 week delay would give us a chance to look at Mother's Day impact and potentially some of Memorial Day. If people would if we just stop group hugging and still shaking hands and the family gatherings that, we take our masks off and we think we're okay with family and it spreads in crowds. But 1 week I don't think is going to hurt us significantly. It'll give us some good data. Dr. Ocaranza and Mario D'Agostino, our fire chief and head of emergency operations, all agreed that this probably would be helpful to us, and given our proximity to Juarez and what impacts that may have, and part of the Mother's Day is probably from family gatherings on both sides of the border.
I think it is a good thing that we did delay it a week, mostly because it gives a lot of these businesses time to review the guidelines, look at them, and trying to implement them into their businesses. Now, these guidelines are coming out. It's a very fluid situation. So we have seen places that are open already that, for instance, it says in there bar stools aren't going to be allowed and there's no sitting or ordering at the bar. Now, these establishments that are already open, do they need to start following these rules as well, or is it only the bars that are going to be opening next week?
Well, what applies to the bars applies to the bars. Everybody needs to be safe. One of the things that I think the restaurants and bars and other establishments, regardless of what they're doing, are going to have to do is appeal to consumer confidence. Are they going to feel safe walking in there? And so whatever they can do to help improve the perception or relay the fact that things are being wiped down and sanitized, et cetera, I think it's going to go to great lengths to help invite customers back. But you look at this on the 29th, we're going to get massage establishments will be open, personal care and beauty services, child care, that and youth camp, other than youth camps, and then dine-in restaurants up to 50%. And remember, outside doesn't count towards that number. If you're dining outside, all you need is the separation of the tables and no more than 6 at one table. Also, I need to remind people, I keep hearing they don't understand that their staff doesn't count towards the 25% or the 50%. It's only the consumer and the people going in. They got the bars, bowling alleys and bingo halls, drive-in concerts, amateur sporting events with no access to the general public. The zoos can start operating on the 29th up to 25%, which will be good. And then after May 31st, the governor's opened professional basketball, baseball, softball, golf, tennis, football, and car racing events with no spectators.
I think the most important thing maybe that's been mentioned so far is that Mayor Margo says that it looks like next Friday, for sure, barring anything unforeseen, we are a go for next Friday.
Yes, sir.
In El Paso. I know that a letter had gone out from Judge Samaniego to Governor Abbott and, asking for the pushback. Did it come back from the governor and say, all right, do you guys really want to do this? And was that a tough decision to finally make? And who was the final word on it?
Well, on the Friday before the letter was released that I wasn't a part of because I really hadn't seen it and been tied up that day, and I'd already talked to the governor on Friday night expressing my concerns because we'd had a significant spike. We had concerns on the hospitalizations, and I called him up and I said, I'm not sure we're going to be ready to expand anymore. And we talked on a Friday night, and he, a week ago Friday, and I said, do I need to send you a formal letter asking to hold off on expansion in El Paso? And he said, no, Dee, I'll do whatever you want. However, in the interim, why don't you think about this? I can send my strike force in to help monitor hotspots and set up more testing sites for you. And then he said I can send my surge team to go in and see where are you having those hotspot problems and why. Well, from an epidemiology standpoint, we'll do that analysis. So that was on a Friday night, and then on Saturday morning they arrived. And I was unable to connect with the judge during that weekend. Tried, but we were unable to connect to explain to him what we were doing and what was in there. And, that I'd conveyed his concerns as well as mine to the governor. Well, we set up 4 additional test sites in hotspots. We're now testing, in addition to the 5 that we already announced that the National Guard is doing in San Eli and Fabens and Horizon and Montana Vista and Benton. These are portable. These are moving around to various hotspots that have been identified by Mario D'Agostino and the emergency operations folks with Dr. Ocaranza. We're now testing over 1,000 people. By tomorrow, we think we've tested at 3% of our, when I say 1,000 people per day, we will have reached almost 3% of our population, and they keep saying, well, we got to get to 5%. We'll be at 5% before the end of June, which was the original target date. And we'll keep testing. So we're going to have, your listeners need to understand, we're going to have many more positives. The more testings we do, the more positives. but it doesn't necessarily equate to the three things I say to look at are hospitalizations, the number of patients in the ICU and intensive care, and the number of patients on ventilators, which we publish every day. But I think we're just going to have to learn how to adapt and live with this until a vaccine is produced.
Now, as far as restaurants going to 50% capacity, when is that going to happen for El Paso? 29th.
Yes.
A week from tomorrow, Buzz.
How about, I know, I'm counting the days. How about retail stores? Are they going to start letting more people in? Because I've seen lines outside. People want to get out and spend some money and shop.
They're still at 25% thus far.
And they'll remain, we don't know exactly when they're going to go tomorrow.
I'm not sure what the governor comes out with something usually on a weekly basis. And I'm looking at his latest order, and I can't tell. I'll go back through, and if I discover something, I'll leave you a message so you can announce it. But I was just reading on the changes for that. I don't see anything different on the retail at this time. It still says 25%.
Okay. 25%.
25%, et cetera.
I'm going to let you go. Just want to mention again, Memorial Day weekend. With everything you've said, say that and this is a make-believe scenario, I'm going to have some people come over. I'm going to cook some burgers. I'm going to have folks come out in the backyard. It's going to be 10 or 15. And honestly, we probably won't be wearing masks. Am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing here?
Well, you got to be careful. When I went to Memo Garcia's funeral, people were hugging and crying. I wasn't going to say a word on it. That was an emotional deal.
Yeah.
The thing I would say is you got to be careful. You got to have distancing, and we got to start getting back to normal, or as normal as it will be.
All right, Mayor, appreciate the visit. Appreciate you checking in with us every week.
Sure, Buzz. Happy to do it. You all have a good week.
All right, happy Memorial Day weekend.